MAGA celebrity Candace Owens had a debate, and one of the people that she was debating with was former CNN host and current News Nation host Chris Cuomo. And Chris Cuomo here did a really nice job of slapping down the MAGA lies about our elections. Yes, we're still dealing with people who are desperately trying to, for the sake of sowing doubt about the 2024 election, lying about the 2020 election and elections since then. And here, Candace Owens tries and fails to make the case that everyone knows we have illegitimate elections. And we'll look at these moments, really good. And then I'll also address one of the things that's brought up, because sort of the core of the argument here is, and because of these issues, we should have strict photo ID requirements. And this is something separate from the absurdity that seems so obviously absurd on its face in terms of the statements made about elections from MAGA. The photo ID discussion is not one that strikes everyone as crazy, for good reasons. Sort of like, oh yeah, why wouldn't we have that? And I'll walk through the details of that I think might be informative. But first, let's take a look at this.
By having a bunch of people who are not Americans coming in and voting. And
where's the proof that happens?
Everybody knows that, okay?
How can you know what we've never been shown? Where is the fraud? Where are the fake votes?
The idea that any person will get up and say to you that they do not believe that you should have an ID to vote. I'm not even gonna characterize what you just said.
But you backed it up by saying that we know that all these people vote who aren't supposed to. Where's the proof of that?
We understand the voting rolls. There's dead people on the voting rolls, and this has been proven
every time they measure this with billions and billions of vote checks. And anybody...
Look at the distress in her face as she realizes Chris Cuomo has the facts on his hands.
Here, or Magic Rob, go up and find different for me on the internet. They look and they see that the amount of fraud in elections is de minimis, which is beyond a level of action. We just went through this.
Okay, let me ask a question a different way.
Chris, hang on.
Let me ask a question a different way.
Okay, what was that? One of the ways you know that Candace Owens, separate from, we'll go through the facts of this in just a little bit, but separate from even diving into the evidence that is on the side of Chris Cuomo's argument, not on the side of Candace Owens' argument, is how many times she says everyone knows. And it's this appeal to what you could call, I guess, faux common sense. And it's just common sense that there's a bunch of widespread voter fraud. Everyone knows that. But what you're relying on is that you've convinced people of something that's not true. So the original thing you convinced them of then allows you to point to that thing and go, he doesn't believe this, so he's the wrong one. But never have you actually demonstrated your original claim, which is that there's widespread voter fraud. And to be clear, even though Chris Cuomo cites analyses of billions of votes that proves we have a very legitimate process in the United States, very legitimate election systems, and fraud is essentially not an issue. There are instances of fraud, but it's essentially not an issue, and never impacting the results of the elections they're conspiracy theorizing about. But he doesn't actually have the burden of proof, so he doesn't even need to cite that. He could just say, you, the person who's claiming there's a bunch of fraud, you need to bring that forward. And years have passed by, and their inability to bring forward such evidence has been stunning. If you appreciate watching this show and you're not already subscribed, please click that subscribe button. Easy, free, but it makes a huge difference. Back to the video.
I don't believe the system is broken and it's rife with fraud. And I will tell you something. I've been watching what's been happening very, very closely after the last election. And I have to tell you, it was upsetting how quiet so many people were who say they're concerned about the elections, that when Truth the Vote came forward with their counsel under penalty of losing their licenses in court. And they said, we have no proof of any of the things that we have asserted in open court. And nobody said anything. They just let it go. Why didn't that bother you?
When everybody gets a mail-in ballot and you have video evidence of people dumping multiple ballots,
why did Truth the Vote say we have no proof?
No. Stop telling me not to believe my own eyes. It's an insult. It is an insult.
Why did they say that?
Listen, I don't care what Truth the Vote said. It is an insult to the American people always to tell them not to believe their own eyes, okay? We saw the video evidence of people going with multiple bags and slowly just inserting more and more ballots that are in there. That's what happens when you mail out a ballot automatically, which is something they want to do in perpetuity in California. I think they've already passed the law. In perpetuity, everyone who, even if you don't ask for one, you're just going to get a mail-in ballot. That allows people to then harbor those ballots and then to dump them off. You can have one person doing all of the votes, okay?
And even though Patrick Bet-David and his team are on Candace Owens' side in this, credit to them for putting this article up referencing what Chris Cuomo mentioned. True the Vote fails to reveal evidence of Georgia voting fraud claims, allegation of ballot collection scheme amplified by 2,000 Mules. So 2,000 Mules, we talked a bunch about, and before we knew that the group giving a lot of this information to the creators of 2,000 Mules would have to come into court and say, we got nothing, we were able to go through just on its face and debunk the ideas presented in 2,000 Mules right when it came out. But that documentary, if you can call it that, was used as sort of the smoking gun for a lot of people. And right there, as she's talking, it's being shown on screen that what she's saying is silly, because she's saying, don't tell us not to believe our lying eyes because we saw the fraud. No, you saw a guy, for example, who's sued because of the false claims made about him in this, who would go up to a ballot drop box and something that in the state where he lived is legal. He got his sealed mother's ballot that she had filled out, maybe a sister or something, and his, and then put them in there, left. Perfectly legitimate. And they played that. The power of, by the way, narration and ominous music in telling people their eyes are seeing something that they're not. So I guess I sort of am saying don't believe your lying eyes, because what you're watching is a perfectly legal activity, just like sort of bins of documents being carried in one of these voting sites, and they'll play it with ominous music and security footage, black and white, and right here you can see that fraud is being engaged in, but then it's investigated, it wasn't fraud at all. So just because you have told your viewers to believe every video of anything election related is proof of fraud doesn't make it true.
And to vote multiple times, you have no idea if that individual ever received their ballot, first and foremost, or who is filling out that ballot on behalf of them. And when you see people on video that are actually doing these things, and then you say, we have no proof, you are doing the thing that the mainstream media always does, which is the reason that the people are now disillusioned, right? They have no interest in the mainstream media anymore because they know that you use this terminology. We have no proof. We have no proof. We have no proof that it causes myocarditis. We have no proof that it's impacting. We have no proof that masks don't work. Okay? You just have to stop doing it, Chris. Honestly.
I don't see how any of those things go together.
It's the argument not
you
to
just
believe.
had all
it's the
this,
argument
wait, hold on.
not to believe
Hold
your
on.
own eyes.
Listen,
constantly.
you can say you believe all your own eyes, but the people who gave you the video went into court, could not prove it, wound up showing that the videos don't mean what they were saying they meant in open court where they had the chance.
The person who
it's absolutely the case that every single time these individuals who are so proud on Fox News, on Newsmax, on the Candace Owens podcast, are so proud to make these allegations, they then are brought to court and have to admit we have nothing, just like Trump's legal team. And sometimes I feel offended. I feel insulted by the very fact that we have to keep talking about this. You've lost time and time again. Get over it. I've used softer language. I've tried to treat you with kid gloves, MAGA, for too long. Now it's time for some tough love. Your fifis don't trump the facts. People like Candace Owens used to say, maybe still says, that we should facts over feelings, right? Okay, now's the time for you to just get over the fact that you can't accept that it hurts so bad that Trump lost and that America apparently doesn't like MAGA as much as you wish they did. But that doesn't mean, just because that's uncomfortable to live with, that doesn't mean you get to lie about our election system to such an extent that Candace Owens is right. Millions of Americans do have these ideas about the legitimacy or lack thereof of our elections when we actually have an incredibly secure election system. And every day, this rhetoric works to deteriorate the belief in our system, which is the thing that holds it all together. In a democratic society, the glue that holds everything together is a belief in, a common belief and dedication to our democratic institutions. Before getting to another clip, there's a really good ACLU fact sheet that I want to talk about, because this is all, again, being brought up to justify the need for photo ID, strict photo ID laws in people showing up to vote. And it sort of gives a rational aesthetic to what are crazy conspiracy theories, right? When you go, oh no, I'm just talking about this because I want good voter ID laws. That sounds a lot more reasonable than just Dominion was flipping millions of votes, right? And the reason is because I don't think you're crazy if you think it sounds logical to have a photo ID law. So let's go through and have the conversation as to why these are so often bad. First, as this ACLU document outlines, strict photo ID requirements are a solution in search of a problem. And I will go through, in case you're curious, how this could be done in theory in a way that isn't bad, how we could have these sorts of requirements in a way that's not bad, but so often they're leveraged in horrible ways. But a study found that from 2000 to 2012, there were only 31, not 31 million, 31 credible allegations of voter impersonation, the only type of fraud that photo IDs could prevent. So the type of fraud that these photo ID laws can prevent, we've had 31 credible allegations of them in 12 years, during a period of time in which over 1 billion ballots were cast. So probably what Chris Cuomo was referring to. When we analyze billions of votes, we got a great secure system here. And then it goes on to note that these instances of fraud are so often mistakes. So even people intentionally trying to go in and impersonate someone is not often intentional. Or is not, sorry, I'm trying to read and talk at the same time, is not often a huge problem. And then we have this. Strict photo ID laws deprive many Americans of the right to vote. Millions of Americans lack government-issued ID, something that I think if you have the photo ID, like my driver's license, because I have a driver's license, whenever I hear these discussions, I go, oh, okay, yeah, I can show up, bring my license. I always have it with me. That's no problem at all. And it's hard to imagine my life without my driver's license, but you have to understand that other people are in other situations. About 7% of U.S. citizens, or more than 16 million Americans, cannot confirm they have a government-issued photo ID. Now, a lot of times these discussions are talked about as voter ID laws, which they're a type of voter ID. Obviously, you have to have identification to vote. You have to identify that you're the person when you're registering to vote, all of that. So it's not voter ID, but instead the specific type of identification that's being required. Obtaining ID costs money, even if offered for free. Many voters must incur numerous costs, such as paying for birth certificates to apply for a government-issued ID. Underlying documents required to obtain ID cost money, a significant expense for lower-income Americans. The combined cost of document fees, travel expenses, and waiting time are estimated to range from $75 to $175. So if there's a problem, then we could talk about adding obstacles to someone's right if there's a big issue with fraud. But we don't have a big issue with fraud. So how could we justify adding these hurdles in someone participating in what is their right as a citizen and saying you may have to incur $75 to $175 of costs to go through the process to have the proper identification that Republicans are arbitrarily saying would make things more secure, even though when it's analyzed, actually states with these strict photo ID laws that are being referred to, don't have more secure elections. The travel required is often a major burden on people with disabilities, the elderly, or those in rural areas without access to a car or public transportation. In Texas, some people in rural areas must travel approximately 170 miles to reach the nearest ID office. So now you're talking about quite the trip and money when there's not a problem that needs to be solved. And a year after Alabama's strict voter ID law went into effect, state officials tried to shut down, what a coincidence, 31 driver's license offices in majority black counties, which would have forced rural and minority voters to travel further to access licenses. So the current way that non-strict photo ID states have in place to identify that you're the person who's the citizen in registering to vote and then showing up at the particular location that you're registered and voting for yourself clearly is already secure enough. Adding a particular extra cost, travel, burden, they haven't yet presented justification for, which is why all that we're going through here seems to be an argument in favor of not doing these sorts of laws. A 2014 GAO study found that strict photo ID laws reduce turnout by 2 to 3 percentage points, which can translate into tens of thousands of votes lost in a single state. And they do this in often discriminatory ways. Like Texas allows handgun licenses for voting, but does not accept student ID cards. Until its voter ID law was struck down, North Carolina prohibited public assistance IDs and state employee ID cards, which are disproportionately held by black voters. Wisconsin's law originally prohibited Veterans Affairs ID cards for voting, but permitted active duty military ID cards. So the point is, they leverage this so often in the way they're writing the law to disproportionately negatively impact certain groups, even just inherent to who has and who doesn't have IDs. Nationally, up to 13% of African American citizens of voting age lack government issued photo ID compared to only 5% of white Americans. So then you have that disparity. And all of this is coming within the context of there not being a problem that's needing to be solved, which is why it's important to point that out. Now, how can we do this? Sorry, and then I'll get to this final clip. How could we do this in a way that's not bad? If they would be willing to facilitate the creation of the bureaucratic framework necessary to get every citizen without any burden on them issued a photo ID that is to the standard that these Republicans want for voting, and there is little to no burden on the citizen, then that could be a way completely paid for by the government that you do this. But how you set that up is a logistical nightmare. But again, it's all about not adding, when there's not an issue, extra hurdles and obstacles to someone participating in their right. Here's more.
The stat they hit me with was the voter ID states do not have better rates, or let's say lower rates of voter fraud than the states without ID. So it doesn't really make a difference.
That is the fraud. that is.
But I'm saying that's what I'm saying. I ran with this. I believe in this. I believe that voting should be as easy and immediate as possible. I think that voting should not be one day. I think that voting, if it is going to be on that one day should be a vacation day for everybody in America so that they can go out and vote. I believe in early voting. I believe in online voting. I believe that we should have as many people voting as possible so we make it as easy as possible. Now, I'm going to tell you something, and you're not going to like it, but that's not my problem. It is not even this issue. It's not both sides of the aisle. The right, until voter ID, has consistently been against anything that would increase who votes.
Okay,
and I think there are reasons for that. But I am in favor.
Yeah, increased voter turnout benefits Democrats because the big secret is the country's more democratic. But they hate when more people can vote because it always benefits Democrats. But that shouldn't be their that shouldn't be the principle. The principle should be, yeah, let's hear what the American people have to say. And if that negatively impacts us, then we'll change our advocacy as politics is supposed to go. Instead of choosing who your voters are going to be, you should try to just win over voters. But again, it's not absurd for you to think just intuitively, oh, that makes sense. Make it nice and secure with a photo ID. And then you learn about how that prevents a lot of people from voting. And you learn that with our current means of identification, we don't have issues with fraud. And so then you're like, oh, okay, never mind. That doesn't seem necessary. Why would we add those hindrances to people's right? And then you wonder why it's so, people who have looked into this, not just because they didn't know about that stuff, but people who have looked into this, why are they so avid about it? Well, because then you can write laws like the ones I mentioned to you that disproportionately suppress the black vote or students voting or any number of other examples. And that often is used to hurt Democratic turnout. So very interesting stuff. Happy we had a chance to talk about that photo ID. discussion because I've been meaning to, and then wild to see people still pushing the same tire nonsense about our elections. Let me know what you thought of all that in the comments. If you want to get the extra episode of the show daily, you can do so by clicking the join button below.